It is a general fact that almost every scientist these days agree that the temperature rise on the Tibetan Plateau is twice more than the average global temperature rise. So this will have a very strong impact on the large glaciers that present on the whole of Tibetan Plateau, which means the Himalaya region is included. Because when we say Tibetan Plateau, it has the whole of Himalaya range. And Himalaya range has the largest amount of glaciers outside the two poles. That's the reason why we call Tibetan Plateau the third pole. So the impact of climate change and the global warming on Tibetan Plateau is much more severe than any other part of the world, because the amount of heat on the Tibetan Plateau surface is much more greater than the other areas of the world.
And how does that affect people's lives on the plateau? What sort of livelihoods would they be likely to what would they be doing up on the Tibetan Plateau in terms of what crops, what animals would they rear, what kind of industries would be affected by warming temperatures?
Mm-hmm. This is a very good question, because climate impact on Tibetan Plateau has had a huge impact on the people of Tibetan Plateau. And the fact of the matter is that Tibetan population, when we have only 6 million, but half of them are nomads, and the other half are farmers. So we have very limited farming crops. As most people plant barley, that's a highland crop. And then the other half of the Tibetan population are nomads. We call them pastoral Tibetan nomads, which means they have been living as nomads for the last thousands of years. And this way of life is more of an adaptation to the actual situation of the Tibetan Plateau, because it's very fragile. It has a very high elevation, and it's very cold once in the past. So the climate change, because of the glacier melt and the permafrost degradation, these things are impacting the Tibetan Plateau as a whole. There's a huge desertification in the northwestern part of Tibet, and also northeastern part of Tibet. And there is grassland degradation in the many parts of the Tibetan Plateau. Tibetan Plateau is covered by around 70% of Tibetan plateaus are under the grassland and permafrost. So because of this global warming and the heat that has been increased on Tibetan Plateau has decreased the amount of grassland on the Tibetan Plateau, and which means, because the important thing here is Tibetan Plateau is home to Asia's 7th largest rivers. So if something happened to the Tibetan Plateau, the country from Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, China, they are none most populated country on earth will be affected. And so the impact of climate change on the Tibetan people is actually much more than any other part. And because of this climate change, these days people use the term climate change so often that Chinese government very often use different kind of environmental policies, which means nomads are not allowed to live as a nomad, that they have been living for thousands of years, and they have removed large number of Tibetan nomads from their traditional way of life and put into a concentrated settlement. And this has made the Tibetan nomads suddenly poor, unaware of their life. There's nothing much to do for them, because Tibetan nomads were expert on their own way of life. They have preserved, this is very interesting. Chinese government has blamed grassland degradation on the Tibetan nomads because of overgrazing and other issues. There might be a little truth in that, but the reason behind the grassland degradation is because of unscientific development that being carried on Tibetan Plateau, because of construction of railway lines, highways on the permafrost region. Tibetan Plateau is not like any other region, it's very fragile. So these things are definitely impacting Tibetan Plateau. And one very recent news that happened on August 16th, which a place called Gyaltsen, which is in the northeast part of Tibet. And these people are mostly they live a nomadic life. In year 2000, Chinese government set up something called Sanjianyu, which means the head source of three rivers. Yellow River, Yangtze River, and Mekong River. So they have set up something called Sanjianyu National Nature Reserve, a very huge, a site that as big as Scotland. So what happened was, when they set up this National Nature Reserve, they removed Tibetan nomads from that area, saying that we need to preserve this source of this large grassland because these are source of greatest rivers that flow to China and other parts of the world. That's fine. But now, what happened in the year 2013, August 16 of 2013, they brought in mining companies in that very place. Now, there's a huge contradiction here. Removing Tibetan nomads and bringing in Chinese state-owned mining companies. So, because Tibet is very rich in minerals, there's huge mining going on. And there's a confrontation always between the Tibetan nomads and the mining companies. Because for Tibetan nomads respect their surroundings. For the Tibetan nomads, they have sacred mountains, sacred rivers, sacred lakes. But the problem is for the Chinese companies, for them, they don't care about that. That is not a big issue for them. For them, where there is mineral, they'll come and dig it. But for the Tibetan nomads, this is something unthinkable. So removing Tibetan nomads, forcing them out of their way of life, and suddenly making them poor, jobless, destitute. This is a problem.